Of all the pharaohs of Egypt, one name towers above the rest, a name synonymous with absolute power, Ramses the Great. He fought mighty empires, built monuments on a scale that defied belief, and fathered 100 children. He was, in every sense, a giant of the ancient world. But the most remarkable part of his story is what happened after his reign. His body was moved by priests to save it from thieves, his statues toppled by earthquakes, and his name was nearly lost to time, only to be rediscovered. Now his entire saga, the warrior, the builder, the God King, has found its ultimate stage at the Grand Egyptian Museum. Join me as we trace the final, incredible leg of his journey, from warrior king to the crown jewel of the world's newest wonder of archaeology. The man who would become Ramses the Great was born around 1303 BC into a nation still finding its footing. His grandfather, Ramses I, was a military man from a non-royal family, chosen by the childless Pharaoh Horemheb to secure the throne. His father, Seti I, was a formidable king who dedicated his reign to restoring Egypt's eroded empire in the Levant in its monumental glory at home. From his earliest days, the boy known as Ramses was groomed for power, given his own household, and the title Commander-in-Chief while he was still in his early teens. Seti I was building a dynasty, and he needed a successor who was not just a ruler, but a force of nature. By his mid-teens, Ramses was accompanying his father on military campaigns, learning the arts of war, strategy, and statecraft on the blood-soaked fields of Canaan and Syria. He witnessed the restoration of Egyptian prestige firsthand. He also saw the vast construction projects his father initiated, most notably the magnificent hypostyle hall at the Temple of Karnak, a forest of towering columns designed to humble any mortal who entered. Seti I was teaching his son a crucial lesson. A pharaoh's immortality was secured not only by the sword, but also by the chisel. A king's name, carved indelibly into stone, could echo for eternity. When Seti I died around 1279 BC, the crown passed to a young man in his early 20s, brimming with ambition, energy, and a divine certainty in his own destiny. He was Ramses II, and Egypt was his to command. Ramses moved with breathtaking speed to cement his legacy. Within the first few years of his reign, he launched a series of military campaigns to secure Egypt's borders and assert his dominance over the Levant. His greatest challenge was the Hittite Empire, a powerful rival based in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, that contested control of the Syrian territories. In the fourth year of his reign, circa 1275 BC, Ramses led a massive army of 4 divisions named after the gods Amun, Ra, Puta, and Seth to confront the Hittite king Muwatalli II at the city of Kadesh. The Battle of Kadesh would become the defining military event of his reign, a near disaster transformed by propaganda into a legendary tale of personal heroism. Lured by false intelligence, Ramses and his Amun division were caught in a devastating Hittite chariot ambush, while the rest of his army was still scattered on the march. According to the official accounts he would later have carved on temple walls across Egypt, Ramses found himself alone, surrounded by enemies. In this moment of peril, he called upon his divine father, the god Amun. Placing his faith in the god, he single-handedly charged the Hittite lines again and again, scattering their forces through his sheer martial prowess until his scattered divisions could arrive and rally. The reality was likely a bloody, chaotic stalemate that ended with both armies too mauled to continue fighting. The Hittites held the field, but Ramses had saved his army from annihilation. Yet, in the world of ancient kingship, perception was everything. Ramses returned to Egypt not as a man who had narrowly escaped defeat, but as a god king who had triumphed against impossible odds. The poem of Pentaur and the Bulletin, texts glorifying his victory, were disseminated, and colossal reliefs of him in his chariot, drawing his bow against the cowering Hittites, were carved at Abu Simbel, Karnak, Luxor, and the Ramesses. He had mastered the art of narrative, turning a tactical draw into a strategic, eternal victory for his image. If the battlefield was one theater of his rule, the landscape of Egypt itself was another. Ramses II was the most prolific builder in Egyptian history. After the pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom, his projects were not simply constructions. They were statements of power, piety, and permanence. He completed his father's hall at Karnak and added vast courtyards and pylons of his own. He built a new capital in the Nile Delta, Ramesses, House of Ramses, a sprawling administrative and military center from which he could launch his campaigns. But his most iconic monuments rose in the far south. In Nubia, at Abu Simbel, he ordered 2 massive temples to be carved directly into the living rock of a cliff face. The larger of the 2 was fronted by 4 seated colossi of Ramses himself, each over 65 feet tall, staring eternally across the Nile toward the land of his southern enemies. The interior extended over 180 feet into the mountain, a sanctuary to the gods Amun, Ra-Horakti, Ptah, and to the deified Ramses himself. He was no longer just a worshipper of the gods. He had joined their company. Nearby, a smaller temple was dedicated to his great royal wife, Nefertari, and the goddess Hathor, adorned with some of the most beautiful and intimate reliefs in all of Egypt, proclaiming his love for his favorite queen. In Thebes, he constructed his magnificent mortuary temple, the Ramesseum. Though now largely in ruins, its scale was staggering. A colossal granite statue of the king once stood there, estimated to have weighed over 1,000 tons. Its shattered pieces inspired the poet Percy Shelley's Ozymandias, a poignant reflection on the decay of even the mightiest empires. Every stone he laid, every statue he commissioned, was a deliberate act of self-deification, an attempt to make the name Ramses an inescapable and everlasting part of the Egyptian world. The swaggering young king of Kadesh eventually matured into a shrewd statesman. The costly stalemate with the Hittites had created an unstable and exhausting status quo. 16 years after Kadesh, facing mutual threats from the rising Assyrian Empire and internal strife, Ramses II and the new Hittite king, Hattusili III, did something unprecedented. In 1258 BC, they signed a formal peace treaty etched on a silver tablet. This Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty is a landmark in world history. It is the earliest known peace treaty for which surviving versions from both sides exist. The treaty, carved on the walls of the Ramesseum and the Temple of Amun at Karnak, established a pact of non-aggression, mutual defense, and the extradition of political refugees between the two superpowers. It declared, "There shall be forever peace and good brotherhood between them." To cement this new alliance, Ramses even married 2 Hittite princesses, daughters of Hattusili III, an event he celebrated with great fanfare in his monuments. This diplomatic masterstroke secured Egypt's northern border for the rest of his reign, allowing for a period of unprecedented prosperity and internal focus. The warrior had become a peacemaker, and in doing so, he secured a legacy far more stable and enduring than any fleeting military victory could provide. The treaty ensured that the latter half of his long rule was a golden age of peace, trade, and monumental construction, a true zenith of the new kingdom. Ramses II ruled Egypt for 66 years, living well into his 90s. He outlived most of his children, his beloved wife Nefertari, and many of his grandchildren. By the end of his life, he was a living relic, a god in human form whose original world had long since passed. He suffered from severe arthritis and hardening of the arteries, his body worn out by age. When he finally died around 1213 BC, he was buried with all the splendor befitting a god king in a lavish tomb, Cave 7, in the Valley of the Kings. But his odyssey was far from over. Within just a few generations, the new kingdom collapsed, and Egypt entered a period of political instability and economic decline. The Valley of the Kings became a target for systematic tomb robbers. Around 1000 BC, fearing the desecration of the great pharaoh's remains, priests of the 21st dynasty undertook a massive secret operation. They removed Ramses II and many other royal mummies from their original tombs. They carefully restored them, rewrapped them, and provided new coffins. Ramses was then moved to a hidden cache in the tomb of his own father, Seti I, and later again to the famous royal cache at Deir el-Bahri, TT 320, a humble, unmarked tomb where he lay hidden and safe, surrounded by the other pharaohs of his line for nearly 3,000 years. The modern world rediscovered Ramses II in 1881. The secret of the Deir el-Bahri cache was revealed, and Egyptian authorities descended into the tomb shaft. There, in a jumble of royal remains, they found him. The linen on his coffin was inscribed, "The King, Uzurmatra Setependra, Ramses II." When his mummy was unwrapped in Cairo, they were face to face with the great pharaoh. His face, with its prominent aquiline nose, strong jaw, and narrow chin, was remarkably preserved. He stood about 5 feet, 8 inches tall, and his body showed the signs of his advanced age: arthritis, poor teeth, and hardened arteries. In the 20th century, his mummy traveled to Paris in 1976 for a scientific study and preservation treatment against a fungal infection. He was issued a formal Egyptian passport, which listed his occupation as king deceased. In a final, surreal twist befitting his epic story, he was greeted at a French airport with full military honors, befitting a visiting head of state. Scientists confirmed the details of his life, his health, and even the likely cause of death. He was no longer just a legend from stone reliefs. He was a tangible, historical figure. This long, winding odyssey, from the throne of an empire to a hidden tomb, from a near mythical name to a scientifically studied mummy, now reaches its next great chapter. The Grand Egyptian Museum stands as a new kind of temple, not for worship, but for witness. It is a monument to preservation, context, and global heritage, while his mummy is destined for a place of honor among the other royal pharaohs. At the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, the Grand Egyptian Museum becomes the ultimate repository of his public life and eternal image. Here, the Colossus of Ramses II, a breathtaking granite statue that once stood in Memphis, greets visitors in the Grand Hall, a titan welcoming them into his story. His war chariot, the very type that thundered across the fields of Kadesh, can be displayed not as a lone artifact but as part of a narrative of empire and propaganda. The meticulous jewelry, the statues of the gods he revered and became, the tools of his craftsmen, all find a new, dignified home. The Grand Egyptian Museum assembles the full scope of his legacy, allowing us to understand the man, the king, and the god in his entirety. The Odyssey of Ramses II is a story spanning over 3 millennia. It is the tale of a man who used every tool at his disposal, military might, architectural genius, and diplomatic skill, to craft a legacy he believed would last forever. He could never have imagined his body being studied by scientists, or his statues viewed by millions of tourists from around the globe. Yet, in a way he would deeply understand, his goal has been achieved. The Grand Egyptian Museum and the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization are the latest and perhaps most profound testaments to his success. The warrior king has completed his final journey, not into the underworld, but into the immortal consciousness of humanity, forever enshrined as a museum icon. Watch the next video to learn about the famous curse of Tutankhamun's tomb, and let us know in the comments below which ancient tale you'd like us to tell next.